Ethan had never imagined sharing an apartment with an alien, not in his wildest dreams. Yet here he was, sitting on the edge of his narrow bed in a small, dimly lit room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft hum of his new roommate's strange technology. The walls of the apartment were too thin, the air too still, but the rent was cheap. And the Galactic Student Exchange Program had offered him the chance of a lifetime, living in a human-alien shared space for a year and learning about interspecies coexistence. At first, Ethan had thought it would be exciting meeting someone from another world. Seeing alien technology up close, learning things he had only read about in books. But now, alone in his room, he felt the weight of his own life pressing down on him. The alien's name was Arkala. She was not like the aliens in movies. She had 4 deep, soft eyes that shimmered in hues of blue and green, skin that glowed faintly in the dark, and a voice that was calm yet strangely melodic. She never raised it, never shouted, and always seemed to move just slightly slower than humans did, as if she existed partly in another rhythm of time. On the surface, she was quiet, polite, and careful. But underneath, Ethan could sense a kind of intelligence that observed everything: his habits, his moods, even the way he forced himself to smile when he didn't want to. Tonight, the apartment was unusually silent. The soft hum of the city outside barely reached Ethan's ears. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear the dull beat of his heart. He had spent the whole day avoiding people, avoiding phone calls, avoiding reminders of the life he thought he had figured out. His ex-girlfriend had sent one last message that morning, a message that felt like a final slap, a confirmation that he had lost something he might never get back. The job he had been working for months on a freelance project had collapsed in a sudden email notification. And now, in the quiet of his room, all the disappointment, all the grief, all the small fears he had ignored came rushing to the surface. He wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to cry, but he did none of that. Instead, he sat still, staring at the ceiling. Pretending that nothing hurt, he didn't hear the faint sliding of the door until it was already open. A soft hiss of air told him that someone or something had entered. He froze. From the corner of the room, a glow appeared, soft but unmistakable. Ethan turned his head slowly, heart thudding in his chest. And there she was, Rakala, standing there in her faint, ethereal light, eyes focused on him. Her voice, calm and clear, filled the room. "Ethan," she said. "Let me help you, human." He blinked, unsure whether to be annoyed, embarrassed, or scared. "Akala, what are you doing?" "It's midnight," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. He wanted to sound angry, to regain some control over the situation, but the words came out weak, unsure. "I sensed distress," she said simply. Her 4 eyes studied him with a quiet intensity. "Your heart rhythm is unstable. Your emotional signals are elevated. You are crying, human." Ethan froze again. His chest tightened. She could sense that. She could tell. He swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. I'm fine," he whispered, almost too quietly to hear himself. "Go back to your room." Kala tilted her head, the soft lights of her eyes flickering. "No, you are not fine. I read your species. When humans say I am fine, it often means the opposite." Ethan's heart sank. How did she know? How could she see so clearly through him, through all the walls he had built around himself? He wanted to laugh to hide the panic, but it came out as a short, broken sound. "You really don't understand boundaries, do you?" he asked bitterly, turning away. "Boundaries?" she repeated softly. "No, but I can learn. If you teach me." Her voice was gentle, almost hopeful, and for the first time in hours, Ethan felt the tiniest spark of something like warmth. Someone, even someone not entirely human, cared enough to stay, to notice, to try. And even though he didn't want to admit it, he needed that spark more than he had realized. The room fell silent again, except for the faint hum of her glowing body and the soft buzz of the city beyond the thin walls. Ethan's thoughts were spinning, but he could not bring himself to ask her to leave. Not yet. There was something in her presence, quiet, persistent, patient, that whispered he might not be entirely alone in this after all. And in that moment, A human and an alien, worlds apart, yet bound by something neither could fully name. Shared the same silent understanding, tonight. Nothing else mattered except being present. Together in the darkness, the night stretched on. And Ethan stayed frozen on the edge of his bed. Staring at the soft glow of Arkala's bioluminescent form, he wanted to speak, to tell her to leave, to push her away, but his voice had vanished. She stood there quietly as if she had all the time in the world. Every human instinct in him told him to protect his privacy, to hide the fear and sadness he felt. But the strange calm emanating from her made it almost impossible to move. Her 4 eyes blinked slowly, watching him, not judging, not mocking, just observing. And in that observation, Ethan felt exposed in a way that was uncomfortable, frightening, and somehow relieving. Finally, he managed a shaky voice. "Arkala, why are you here? Why now?" He tried to sound annoyed, but the words trembled. He hated himself for being this weak. Humans were supposed to deal with pain. Humans were supposed to keep their sadness to themselves. Yet here he was, completely unguarded in front of someone who wasn't even human. "I am here because you are suffering," she said simply. Her voice was calm, and the words felt heavier than any human lecture ever could. "Your distress is detectable. It calls attention. I cannot ignore it." Ethan looked away, staring at the blank wall. He felt embarrassed, ashamed, and angry all at once. "You were listening to me?" he muttered. "I didn't say anything. You do not need words for me to notice," Arkala replied softly. "Humans release chemical signals when they cry or feel pain. I sensed them. It is why I know you are not fine." Ethan's chest tightened. She could sense everything, even when he thought he was hiding it perfectly. He felt small, fragile, and utterly human. He wanted to laugh, but the sound came out as a strangled sigh. "I'm fine," he whispered, repeating the lie that had become second nature. "Go back to your room." Arkala stepped closer, the soft light from her skin illuminating his features in a gentle, almost comforting glow. "You are not fine," she said firmly, almost as if she was stating a law of the universe. Humans often say, "I'm fine," when they mean the opposite. I read this in your literature. Her words struck Ethan harder than he expected. He had spent months hiding his feelings, pretending to be okay when he was falling apart inside. And now, an alien, a being from another world entirely, was seeing right through him. The walls he had built around his emotions were crumbling, brick by brick, under her calm, watchful gaze. "I don't need help," he muttered finally, his voice breaking. "You don't understand what I'm going through." "I do not understand completely," she admitted, her 4 eyes blinking slowly. "But I understand loneliness. I understand suffering. And I understand the weight of silence when someone has no one to talk to. I can learn, if you teach me." Ethan shook his head, trying to brush away the feeling of vulnerability that threatened to overwhelm him. He had spent so long believing that humans had to deal with their problems alone, that asking for help was weakness. But Arkala's presence challenged everything he thought he knew about pain, about strength, about companionship. She was not human. She didn't share his experiences, his culture, or even his language fully. And yet, somehow, she understood him more than most humans ever had. The room remained quiet, filled only with the faint hum of her bioluminescence and the occasional creak of the old apartment settling. Ethan's thoughts raced, memories of the past weeks and months flooding back. The arguments with his ex, the long, lonely nights at work, the emails of rejection he had tried so hard to ignore, all of it seemed smaller, yet heavier. With Rykala's quiet presence beside him, "You don't need to hide from me," she said after a long pause, her voice gentle, almost like a whisper. "Pain is not shameful. Crying is not weakness. And being human does not mean being alone." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He felt the tight knot in his chest slowly loosen, the first hint of relief since everything had begun falling apart. Her words weren't magic. They weren't a solution to his problems. But they were an acknowledgement, a validation that his suffering mattered, that it was seen, and that someone, Even an alien roommate cared enough to stay with him in his darkest moment. Finally, he exhaled a long, shaky breath that carried with it a small piece of the weight he had been holding on to. He didn't know what would happen next or how he would face the coming days. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a small flicker of hope. And in that flicker, amidst the quiet of a small human room on a distant planet, Ethan realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think in months. He was not entirely alone. The days after that night passed slowly, but they passed differently. Ethan noticed things he had never seen before. The small apartment no longer felt entirely empty. Arkala moved quietly around, always careful not to disturb him, yet always present. She had a way of leaving small traces of herself in his life, little gestures that seemed insignificant at first, but over time began to carry weight. A cup of warm tea left on his desk in the morning, a tiny note written in shaky human letters that said, "You are not alone." Even the hum of her presence in the living room had a comforting rhythm, a reminder that he was being observed with kindness, not judgment. At first, Ethan resisted. He didn't want help. He didn't want company. He didn't want to feel again. The weight of the world pressed down on him, and he had learned to carry it alone. But Arkala's gestures were persistent. She didn't demand. She didn't insist. She just was there. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he started responding. He would sip the tea she left without speaking, read the notes without crumpling them, and sometimes, in fleeting moments, even smile when she hummed her strange, watery tune. One evening, he came home from work exhausted, every bone in his body aching. He expected the apartment to be empty, as it always had been, but Arkala was there waiting. "How was your son today?" she asked, tilting her head in that peculiar way she had. Her question was odd, the phrasing strange, yet it was asked with genuine concern. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to brush her off, but the exhaustion in his body made words feel unnecessary. He sank onto the sofa, letting out a long, tired sigh. "It was hard," he admitted finally. His voice sounded small in the quiet room. "I see," Arkala said softly. She came closer, standing by the light of the kitchen, and her glow reflected off the walls in gentle waves. "Your distress level is high. I can adjust the atmosphere to help you relax." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're not supposed to fix me," he said, a weak attempt at humor, though his chest still felt tight. "I am not fixing," she replied. "I am aiding." Humans often confuse these things. Aid is giving comfort without expectation. Fixing implies judgment. Her words lingered. Ethan didn't realize how much he had needed someone to offer aid, not advice. It's not judgment, not solutions, just a presence that cared. Slowly, he let his guard down. He leaned back, letting the soft light wash over him, felt the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in weeks. Over the next days, Akala's strange kindness continued. She asked him questions that made him think, questions that seemed simple, but held a depth he couldn't ignore. "Why do humans hide tears when water is sacred?" she asked one afternoon, tilting her head. "Is it shame?" Ethan hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. No therapist, no friend. And for some reason, he answered, "It's complicated. People are afraid of being weak. They think showing pain makes them lesser." Arkala blinked with all four eyes. "Weakness is necessary to understand strength," she said. "Your species hides it, yet it grows inside you anyway." Ethan stared at her. Somehow, in her simple observation, she had made sense of a truth he had ignored for so long. He laughed quietly, a sound that felt strange in the empty apartment. "You're surprisingly smart," he admitted. "I learn," she said softly, and then her glow pulsed like a heartbeat. "And I care. It is why I remain near you." That night, Ethan found himself sleeping a little easier. Not completely, not perfectly, but easier. The loneliness that had weighed on him for so long felt lighter. He realized he had begun looking forward to Arkala's presence, her strange little habits, her unwavering patience. She didn't rush him, she didn't push him, and somehow, that made him feel safe, something he hadn't felt in months, maybe even years. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to think that maybe he could survive his grief, that maybe he didn't have to face everything alone. Arkala had not said much. She had not performed any grand acts. But her quiet attention, her willingness to notice him without judgment, had begun to chip away at the walls he had built. And slowly, piece by piece, he felt the stirrings of hope return to his heart by the end of the week. He found himself leaving his door open, letting her come and go, letting her presence fill the apartment like a gentle light that refused to fade. And in that quiet companionship, Ethan began to realize that healing was not a solo journey. Sometimes it came from the small, patient acts of another being, even one from a distant world, who simply chose to care. It started as a normal evening, but nothing about that night was normal for Ethan. He had tried to keep his routine dinner. A few emails, a short walk, but each step felt heavier than the last. The apartment felt colder, darker, and somehow emptier despite Arkala's presence in the next room. For the first time, he realized that the small comforts she had offered, the tea, the notes, the humming, could not shield him from the storm inside. The day had been brutal. His freelance project, which he had poured countless hours into, had collapsed with a single email. His boss had written a curt note saying the budget was gone, the work unnecessary. And then, in the middle of the afternoon, a message from his ex appeared on his phone. A short, cold sentence that stabbed deeper than any physical wound. Ethan had tried to ignore it. He had tried to distract himself with work, with meaningless tasks. But when he finally sat down in the apartment, the weight of everything pressed down on him like a stone. Hours passed and the tightness in his chest grew. He stared at the wall, blank and unfeeling, but inside, his thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, sorrow, and regret. He had been holding everything inside for so long, pretending he was okay. But tonight, the facade crumbled. Tears that he thought had dried long ago returned hot and sharp, slipping silently down his cheeks. Ethan didn't hear her come at first. He was too consumed by the storm inside him. But then a soft sound, almost a whisper of movement, told him she was near. Arkala appeared at the door, her bioluminescent glow painting the room in gentle waves of blue and green. "Let me help you, human," she said. The words calm, steady, yet carrying an unexpected urgency. He turned toward her, eyes wide, chest heaving. "I don't need help," he shouted, his voice breaking raw with emotion. "You don't understand what I'm feeling. You're not human. You can't." "I do not need to be human to understand pain," she said softly. Her 4 eyes looked into his like she could see every fracture in his heart. "I have observed suffering across species. I know what it feels like to be alone in a world that does not notice you." Her words hit him like a wave, and something inside Ethan finally gave way. The tears he had tried to hold back came freely now, accompanied by sobs he could not control. He sank to the floor, curling in on himself, as the room seemed to shrink around him. All the anger at the world, all the disappointment in himself, all the fear he had buried under layers of pretense spilled out in a torrent he could no longer restrain. Arkala knelt beside him, her glowing body radiating warmth. "I will not leave," she said gently. "I am here. I will stay." Ethan shook his head violently, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. "Why? Why do you care? You don't have to. You could leave. You could ignore me like everyone else." She placed a hand on his shoulder, cool, soft, grounding. "Because I choose to." Pain shared is lighter. Even humans need this truth. You are not shameful for your tears. You are not weak. You are alive, and life is difficult. I will be with you until you remember that it is worth continuing. Something in Ethan's chest loosened at her words. Her presence was not judgmental, not demanding. She did not try to fix him or offer solutions. She simply was a steady, patient, understanding companion in the middle of his breakdown. Slowly, he allowed himself to breathe, to lean into the support she offered, to let go of the weight he had carried alone for far too long. The night wore on. Ethan cried, whispered things he hadn't said aloud in months, and at times even laughed through the pain at the absurdity of finding comfort from an alien roommate. who seemed more human in empathy than anyone he knew. Arkala stayed, humming softly in her strange watery tune, a song of grief and care from her world. The room, once suffocating with darkness, felt lighter. Filled with warmth and understanding, by the time Ethan finally lay on the floor, exhausted and trembling, he realized something he had never allowed himself to admit. He had survived. Not alone, but because someone so different, so alien, had refused to leave him in his darkest hour. And in that realization, a flicker of hope ignited in his heart, small and fragile, but real. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the weight of despair begin to lift. And he knew deep down that this night, the night of his breakdown, had changed something. He would never see Rakala as just an alien roommate again. She had become a lifeline, a presence that reminded him of what it meant to be human, to feel, to suffer, and to be cared for, even in the bleakest hours. The next morning, sunlight spilled weakly into the small apartment, painting the walls with gold and orange streaks. Ethan stirred on the couch, muscles sore, eyes puffy from crying, yet something inside him felt lighter. He glanced around, expecting the room to be empty, expecting to be alone again. But Arkala was already there, moving quietly in the kitchen. Her glow had dimmed to a soft shimmer, and the faint sound of her hum filled the air, gentle, steady and soothing. "Good morning," she said softly, noticing him stirring. The words sounded strange, melodic, and oddly comforting. Ethan wanted to grumble, wanted to hide, but instead, he allowed a small, tired smile to escape. "Morning," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Arkala tilted her head, watching him carefully. "Your distress is reduced," she said, as if noting a scientific observation. Then, after a pause, she added, "I am glad you are still fighting, human." Ethan swallowed. Her words weren't just about surviving the night. They were about recognition, acknowledgement, and connection, something he hadn't felt in months. And without thinking, he replied, I don't know how to fight sometimes. "You do not need to fight alone," she said softly, moving closer. Her bioluminescence reflected gently off the walls, creating ripples of light that danced over Ethan's tired face. "I can stay. I can be with you. You only need to allow it." For the first time, Ethan let himself lean on someone without guilt or shame. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he watched her, watched the calm, patient way she existed in his space, and felt a small part of his heart begin to mend. The comfort was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. A bridge forming between him and a being from a distant world. The days that followed were quiet but profound. Ethan started to talk more, at first in small, hesitant sentences, then in longer, more honest conversations. Arkala never interrupted. She never judged. She simply listened, asked questions, and occasionally offered insights that made him pause and think. Why do humans hide their sadness when it is so natural? She asked one evening, as he stared out the window at the city lights. Ethan laughed softly, the sound rough but genuine. "I think we're afraid it makes us weak," he admitted. "We think showing pain will make others see us differently. Or maybe we're just afraid of facing it ourselves." Arkala's 4 eyes blinked slowly, her glow pulsing slightly. "Weakness is part of growth. Pain teaches resilience. You are strong for feeling it, not for hiding it." Ethan paused, considering her words. Somehow, in her simple observations, she had said what no human ever had. And for the first time, he realized that healing wasn't about pretending to be strong. It was about being seen, understood, and supported, something Arkala had given him without condition. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the window, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor while Rakala hummed her watery tune nearby. The rhythm of her song reminded him of streams he had only seen in pictures of distant planets. It was soothing in a way that was difficult to describe. "Why do you care so much?" he asked finally, not looking at her, his voice quiet. "Because I choose to," she said simply. Her voice was steady, confident, yet filled with warmth. "And because I have learned that helping is not about fixing. It is about staying. You have allowed me to stay human, and so I remain." Ethan exhaled, a long, shaky breath, that seemed to carry away months of unspoken tension. He looked at her for the first time that day, really looked, and noticed the faint shimmer of her skin, the four eyes that reflected understanding, and the small, steady presence that had become his lifeline. In the following weeks, Ethan began to notice changes in himself. He smiled more often, worked more confidently, and even started drawing again, something he had abandoned when life became too heavy. The apartment felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Arkala's presence wasn't overwhelming. It was like a quiet light that guided him gently out of darkness. He began leaving his door slightly open, letting her move in and out of the room freely. They shared small moments, tea in the morning, quiet conversations at night, the soft hum of her song while he read or sketched. Each moment built a connection, a bridge between their hearts, between two beings from entirely different worlds, and slowly, Ethan began to understand a truth he had forgotten. Sometimes, healing does not come from solitude or grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from the patient, persistent kindness of someone who simply chooses to stay, to care, and to remind you that even when life feels unbearable, you are not truly alone. Morning came slowly, filtered through the thin curtains in soft gold and amber light. Ethan stirred awake on the couch, his body still heavy from the nights of tears and the emotional weight he had carried for so long. But this morning felt different. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't free of pain. But it was lighter, like the first hint of sun after a stormy night. Arkala was already awake. Sitting quietly at the small kitchen table, her glow was gentle, not harsh, and the soft hum of her presence felt like a heartbeat in the quiet apartment. For a moment, Ethan just watched her. He noticed how she moved with calm precision, how she handled simple tasks with careful attention, and how the faint light of her skin reflected the warmth of the rising sun. It was peaceful, and somehow, it made him feel more human. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice melodic, almost blending with the sound of the morning outside. "Morning," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse but steadier than it had been in days. He rose slowly, stretching and feeling muscles that hadn't relaxed in weeks. Arkala tilted her head, watching him with quiet interest. "You slept well," she observed. For the first time in a while, he admitted, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The words felt strange to say out loud. They felt like permission to exist in the light again, even if only for a little while. They shared a quiet breakfast, tea in his cup and a few small biscuits she had prepared. The conversation was gentle, nothing heavy, just fragments of words that bridged the silence between them. "Do humans always find mornings comforting after storms?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Sometimes," Ethan replied, sipping his tea. "It depends on the storm. Some mornings are brighter than others. Some just feel empty." He paused, staring at the steam curling above the cup. "But today feels different." Arkala blinked with all four eyes, her glow pulsing faintly. "Then this day is meaningful," she said softly. "Every day is meaningful if you survive it, if you face it. And you are facing this one." Ethan's chest tightened with emotion. Her words weren't grand, but they carried weight, recognition, understanding, and encouragement all in one. He realized with a sudden clarity that he had begun to heal. Not completely, and not perfectly, but enough to feel hope again. He could laugh again. He could plan again. He could feel without being crushed by the intensity of everything after breakfast. He found himself in his small workspace, sketching quietly while Arkala hummed her gentle tune nearby. The rhythm of her song reminded him of streams and soft rains, of moments of peace he had almost forgotten. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to make the apartment feel alive, warm and safe. As the hours passed, he noticed small changes in himself. He was calmer, more patient, more willing to notice the little things, the sunlight through the window, the sound of rain on the roof, the simple rhythm of breathing, and he began to realize that his connection with Arkala was a part of that change. She had not forced him to heal, nor had she given him magic solutions. She had simply stayed. She had simply cared. And in doing so, she had reminded him of something essential, that being human didn't mean enduring pain alone. That evening, As the sky shifted from gold to deep purple, Ethan sat by the window with Arcala. The city lights blinked on slowly, and the world outside seemed vast and alive. "Do humans always need help to heal?" he asked softly. "Not always," she replied, her voice gentle. "But sometimes help is not about fixing. It is about sharing presence, understanding, and care. Healing grows in spaces where someone chooses to stay, even when it is hard." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling the truth of her words sink into him. He realized that night, through tears, through laughter, through quiet mornings and gentle presence, he had begun to rebuild himself. And though life remained uncertain, though challenges still waited beyond the walls of the apartment, he knew one undeniable truth. He was no longer entirely alone as the night fell. Arcala hummed again, the familiar watery tune filling the apartment. Ethan felt a deep calm settle over him. He had survived the storm, and in its wake, something beautiful had grown, a fragile, real connection that reminded him of what it meant to be human, to feel and to be seen. For the first time in months, Ethan believed that life could be gentle, even amidst hardship. And as he leaned back watching the glow of his alien roommate and the stars beyond the window, he allowed himself to hope quietly, softly, fully that the future could be brighter than the past.